welcome to another edition of BNEWS In Depth. I'm your host, BNEWS Director Rich Hosford. This month we are going to look at a project that has garnered a lot of discussion at recent planning board meetings. It includes the drone cage that has been built on the Northeastern University Burlington campus and the planned 104,000 square foot building that will be built as a part of a multi-phase project that was recently approved by the planning board. The issue at hand is that the project abuts Mary Cummings Park, and members of the Friends Group for the park argue that the new development will mar the experience of park goers. I will talk to two people who have led the charge against the project in the second half of the show. But first I'll speak to attorney Robert Buckley of Reamer & Braunstein, who represented Northeastern in its dealings with the town. He says the project, which includes military contracts and space to work with up-and-coming tech entrepreneurs, will bring economic benefits to Burlington, and associated roadwork and site improvements will also benefit that part of town. Here is my interview with attorney Buckley. Welcome back. My first guest today is the attorney for the proponent for Northeastern, Robert Buckley of Reamer & Braunstein. Excuse me. Hi, Bob. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Rich.
I introduced you as Robert, but I've never actually heard anyone call you that before.
No. They've called me a lot of other things, but yeah, whatever you call it. Bob is fine.
So I just want to start off, talk about sort of the big picture, people who haven't been following this project. What was proposed, what's going to be done?
Well, let's start back a couple of years ago where Northeastern was looking at its suburban campus locations, trying to reposition them. And one of them has been in Burlington for, I believe, since the early 60s, maybe. The decision was made primarily when the Costas Center went in a few years ago to turn Burlington into an innovation campus. That's a term of art that's used in the economy today, which is indicative of developing new technologies and delivering them to the marketplace. So they made a commitment to turn it into an innovation center. At the same time, the Department of the Army was looking for research facilities for high-level cybersecurity and electronic research, and they chose 4 locations nationwide to partner with universities. One of them is with the University of Chicago in Chicago. I believe it's University of California in San Diego. There's one in, I believe it's in Louisiana. It may be Rice or Tulane, I'm not sure. And then Northeastern. So this is a facility, and you may have seen in the paper recently, the governor, as well as our 2 U.S. senators and Congressman Moulton, came for a signing ceremony with the Department of the Army to solidify the agreement between the Army and Northeastern. And what it is basically going to be is a facility of about 104,000 square feet devoted to research, innovation research, which is the Army contracting with Northeastern, or the government contracting with Northeastern, as well as third parties, corporations such as, I use them as examples, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, to work with the academic institution to do high-level research to deliver products primarily for Homeland Security, which is what the Costas Center was designated for, to the environment, to the country. So the process began, as I said, with the Costas Center, which has been a tremendous success. This is a progression along those lines. And here they will be doing research, some of it with the drones, which are the small devices that will have optics and communication devices, as well as other electronic research, working in collaboration with the faculty of Northeastern.
So like you said, only four places across the country. So it's something that obviously the military has a big interest in having this work. And so what does it entail as far as actual facilities that need to be built?
It's a 104,000 square foot building, which will, and that's one of the issues that came up during the hearing process. It is laboratory space, it's classroom space, it's collaboration space, and it's there is an assembly hall auditorium. and the usual accessory uses that go along with that in terms of cafeterias and places that you'd have in any type of building. And you have what is called the drone cage, which is a facility that will allow for the testing of these drones, which are battery operated, they're not gas powered. And so it will be a facility that will be vibrant. It will have a green roof of about 5,500 square feet. It's quite a facility. And it was designed, during the process there was a lot of debate about, well, just move the building or just spin the building on its axis or change it. The problem with particularly a building which you design for a specific program here, research, the program design dictates the architectural design of the building. And then you have the site constraints that dictate where that building is going to be located. It's unlike, for lack of a better example, a single-family home where you could shift it 15 feet or 20 feet, and it's not a big deal. Here, when you have a building that has been specifically designed for specific types of programs to be conducted in that building, it's extremely difficult, particularly with respect to mechanicals and the operating systems that have to be paired or tied to specific laboratories and the research that's going to be done. And then on top of that, we have the site constraints. People may not know this, they probably do, but back in the 60s, that site was a Nike missile site. There were Nike missiles in the ground there that were used as part of the U.S. defense system, primarily for Hanscom. And the bunkers that handle those missiles are still there. They've been filled, but they're still there. And one can only, they were designed to withstand, obviously, a direct attack,
Right.
So to try to remove those would be an astronomical cost factor. And the decision was made, where can you locate this building? Again, reflecting on the program design. That was a constraining factor in the location of the building and the design of the building.
So unique building challenge.
Very
missile
unique.
silos
Yeah,
or bunkers.
Yeah, and I always thought they were, shame on me, I thought they were the tubes, but they were actually platforms on elevators that would come up, and the missiles would be on the rack system. So.
Oh, okay. I think I was picturing tubes as well.
Right, right. But they're still the bunkers are still there. So, but they've been filled.
Now, one part of the project, if I understand correctly, is working with up-and-coming businesses to try to, help them kind of get off their feet. Talk about how that works.
Well, we had this debate one night at the planning board. There's a difference between incubation space and innovation space. You and I can have a great idea, and we can say, you know what, we're going to develop this new widget that's going to revolutionize the world. But it's an idea, and we may be able to raise some capital. And so, but we don't have space to test our theories or do the lab space or whatever. So we go to what are called incubators, where they will give you lab space or shared lab space, usually at a below market basis for a short period of time to get us on our feet, test our idea, and then go to the marketplace with it. That's incubation space.
And we're basically still on our own in this scenario.
That's right. Innovation space is somewhat different. Innovation space is you have the intellectual talent. Here we have the faculty of Northeastern that can conduct the research. We have companies that are willing to fund that research, the third parties, which will hopefully lead to different types of products and businesses that either want to be around where this research is being conducted, or they will spin off new technologies. This area, the 128, you weren't alive, but it used to be referred to as one technology highway back in the 50s and 60s. And the reason for that is that technologies out of the space program, et cetera, came out of the research that was being funded by the government and spawned all of this development and made the 128 corridor one of the high-tech corridors, just like Silicon Valley is in California. So this innovation that Northeastern is going to engage in over time will spin off technologies that will be picked up by third parties in this area, improved upon. You know, you have your MITREs, you have your Lincoln Labs, you have all these these research facilities around here. This is another component in that puzzle. And what people don't, when you do a project like this, it's a balancing of the equity, so to speak, I suppose. So that's a word. You know, out of this is going to come technologies that's going to create jobs. Mm-hmm. You know, just a little example. In 2 years, in 2020, you're mandated to do what is called the BRAC, Base Realignment and Closure Act, that every 10 years you're supposed to look at your military bases and determine whether you should keep them open, close them. And if you recall, over the last couple of decades, Hanscom has always been one of those bases that they say, should we keep it, should we not? Hanscom puts $8 billion a year into the local economy. It creates thousands and thousands of jobs. This is another reason to keep a place like Hanscom open, because the technology, the research, the excitement that's going to be generated from this type of project is going to spawn new technologies that will solidify the economy. And if we have a downturn in the economy, the one thing we are always assured of is that defense spending does not necessarily go down.
No, it's not part of the market.
Right. So that stabilizes, if you're a community like Burlington, that stabilizes your tax base. So there are a lot of benefits for the town. On the other side, the property is a carve-out because it was a Nike base. The federal government took it from the Mary Cummings Trust. Mm-hmm. They had the power of eminent domain because of the federal supremacy clause allows you to trump anything. And they took that land back in the 50s, I believe. And when they were done, they conveyed it to Northeastern. So you have this bubble in the middle of the Mary Cummings Trust, which is now privately owned. And then, so now you've got to balance the rights of the ability to develop private property versus open space. And I thought we tried to address that by saying one of the problems over the last 20 years for the Friends of Mary Cummings Trust is to get the city of Boston to listen to them, to have someone with the financial resources to manage the Mary Cummings Trust Park, and to enhance communication between the city of Boston, the town of Burlington, the trustees of reservation, which has been designated by the city of Boston, and the Friends. So I have to actually give a lot of compliments to the town's planning staff, in particular Kristen Kasner, who had a vision here to say this is an opportunity to solidify that communication and put it in place, which frankly over the last couple of decades has been somewhat disjoint, and when you have a disjoint communication track, you have a lot of misunderstanding. So she and Representative Gordon, with the ability to mobilize the city of Boston and some state communication aspects, brought all the parties to the table and allows for some discussion. So what does that translate into? The trustees need to raise funds. The funds now, you know, they're going to have access to hopefully a vibrant area, including Northeastern, that will assist them in raising the funds that they will need over time to manage that park. The decisions that we agreed to, Northeastern agreed to as part of the process, require that if there's any major decisions to be made on the park or on the site, that the parties all confer together. So you've established that communication, which I think, while people don't give it credit, I think that is tremendous because, as I said, when you don't have that communication, you have a lot of misunderstanding.
Right, and we're going to hear from some of the side that has concerns about this. But just in your view, maybe catch people up a little bit. What were some of the concerns raised? The discussions that had. I mean, there were some long planning board meetings that you were part of. Well, how would you sort of encapsulate?
The concern and people, it's a natural reaction. People, I always say, people vote what they see. And most people have they can't envision what is being discussed. I tell my staff all the time, we're very close to everything, so what we take as secondhand is somewhat foreign to the average person. we could see it because we look at the plans, we understand the vision, we can play it out. But the average person doesn't see it. I think, by and large, the concern was, well, when we're out in the meadow or we're in the Mary Cummings land, we're going to see a building where there was no building before. And that is the reality. And that's why you're trying to balance the rights of property owners versus the rights of parties who use the Mary Cummings parkland for their recreation.
Right.
So that was one of the big issues. And so we said, okay, what can we do to mitigate that? So we had a number of meetings with the trustees, and we tried to develop some, I consider it innovative screening techniques by using mature vegetation so that when someone's looking from afar at the building, the bulk of the building, the massing is somewhat mitigated. We tried to design it in a way that kind of blends in, and that's subjective. People will say, well, you still see the building. Well, today you see a water tower and you see an antenna field.
Right.
And so there's that balancing, and you're trying to strike that balance. And that balance is, okay, what's the personal view of someone standing in the park looking at it versus, as I said earlier, the economic stability that it will hopefully generate over time for this region, the jobs it will create, the vibrancy it will create, and it's trying to work that through. But one of the problems, and I see it more and more, we see it at the national level, but it's also at the local level. I always say, turn down the volume. Let's just turn down the volume. And if you talk these things through, oftentimes there is a solution. We're probably speaking the same language,
right.
Maybe a different dialect, but we're speaking the same language. But people don't want to listen anymore. And, no one's going to walk away from the table feeling that they got everything they wanted. I think here, as I said, Kristen Kastner and the planning staff had some ideas that they were going to use this to leverage some improvements that were needed in that area. Representative Gordon saw it as an opportunity because he was involved with the Friends early on to solidify communication. And here's what people, that came from the planning board staff. There's an intersection, it's actually in Woburn, where it's the 3A in South Bedford.
Right, that was going to be my next set of questions.
Which
is
a
other sort of, because most of these projects, when they're big projects,
right.
The developer will say, okay, we'll do some other area improvements. So yeah, so talk about, I think, a well-known intersection for most people.
And it's a very difficult intersection, and your planning board staff said this is an opportunity to make something happen there. And we had to be extremely creative because the land on either side is part of the trust land. So we came up with some innovative techniques to get over some state hurdles that if we have to widen that intersection, how can we replicate the land we take? And we came up with some solutions I think that work. Representative Gordon came up with some ideas that how we can get some funding for it. Northeastern is going to provide some funding. Some other projects are going to provide some funding to do the plans. And when the day is done, I think we're going to have a meaningful improvement at that intersection. That benefits Northeastern, no doubt. It benefits everyone who travels that area. What it also did is it established communication between Woburn and Burlington. So now they're talking about the same issue. Woburn said, we're in on this because we want to fix that intersection also. So again, it was a situation that a lot of parties were brought to the table and a lot of discussions occurred. Unfortunately, when you try to explain that in a 20, 30, 5-hour planning board meeting, a lot's lost. I mean,
Right.
it's like reading the abridged version of War and Peace. I mean, there was a war and a war ended, right? So there's a lot of good over time that will come out of this. Is everyone going to be extremely happy? I'm sure that the people on the Friends are going to say, we see a building where there was heretofore no building. But they're also going to have improved trail systems. They're going to have improved drainage. They're going to have the ability of the trustees to raise money to make that a vibrant and enjoyable place, which is a benefit not only to Northeastern and the Friends, but it's also a benefit to everyone in town and the surrounding businesses. And I said, it's an amenity. We should have these businesses touting that as an amenity. So there are a lot of positives that come out of it. Unfortunately, not everyone gets what they want, 100%, which I suppose is a sign of a good deal.
I think they often said that, or it's an old
Right.
saying. Now, you talked about improved drainage, improved trails. So what kind of, agreements,
Well,
what are the particulars that kind of
right
came
now,
out?
for instance, the water running off the majority of that site is what is called sheet flow, and it's untreated. So when it washes off into the Mary Cummings parkland, it's not treated. So if there's any pollutants in the water, gasoline, oil, whatever from the parking lot, it washes into the existing drainage swales.
Right.
As part of this process, the planning board insisted that we bring the drainage up to state standards on the entire site,
Okay.
which we have done. So now, in the drainage easement that is on the Mary Cummings Trust, the water leaving there is at a less, the volume is decreased, and the quality of the water meets the state standards, which I don't want to get technical, but it exceeds 80% of suspended solid removal. We're also going to make some improvements to where the drainage is in the easement, where it has scoured over time some of the channel. We're going to put riprap and solidify that and put it under a trail so people can go over it, so eliminate any possible erosion. If you drive up to the site, you'll notice on both sides of the driveway up to the site, there's erosion there. We're going to fix that. We're going to fix at the bottom of the hill where the site drive intersects South Bedford Street, which is really town land, but we're going to work on some of the catch basins down there to improve the drainage there. So there are a lot of benefits on drainage to bring it up to where it should be today. If this were a virgin project going out there, these are the things you'd have to do.
Right, these would be the standards to meet.
Right, so we're going to meet all those. So.
And last thing, I guess, or second to last, is, there was a lot of these discussions, as you talked about, long planning board meetings, and a lot of discussion about, the building itself. Were any changes made based on the concerns of the people, from Mary Cummings, Friends of Mary Cummings Park?
Well, again, perception is a subjective criteria. The back of the building is of a material and of a design to mitigate as much as possible. It's not reflective. It's stock based. The window pattern is not your standard ribbon windows. You just have ribbons of windows that are kind of broken up. And there's some articulation of the sides to make it look architecturally not a box dropped on a parcel. What people kept reporting is it's right on the property. It's right on the Mary Cummings Trust line. It really isn't. It's over 50 feet away, and if you were doing a commercial building, that's a usual that's a setback that you do anywhere in town.
Right,
so
from the street usually.
Right. Well, and you're maintaining that. So. A lot of thought was put into it. While it doesn't come out in a, as I said, a 20 or 30 minute or a 5-hour planning board meeting, a lot of thought was put into that. The planning board did insist upon, and Northeastern did agree to put some vegetation along the perimeter, eliminate some of the parking in the back, all of the parking in the back. So there'll be trees that will be of an average height to begin with of 25 feet, which will grow rapidly. So a lot of the building will be masked by natural vegetation. We're moving the existing trailhead, which came to the corner of the building, down closer towards South Bedford Street, towards the old library building, which is that red building if you've gone up there. And there'll be some parking in that area, so there'll be a new trailhead. We're working with the city of Woburn that, we didn't know this until we actually met with them, that periodically they have a water tower that's on, I think it's called Whispering Hills, is their park on the other side.
Okay.
And so that they would bring equipment up there, so that would go over some of the trails. So we're going to alter that, so give them a more direct route that's less intrusive to the parkland. So a lot of those types of benefits are being effectuated. So, but the big thing that comes out of this is now there's communication. There was no communication before. And now we know, when I say we, the collective, the city of Boston, the town of Burlington, the city of Woburn, the trustees and their friends all know who they're going to be dealing with. And when you have that communication, ultimately, if you turn down the volume and listen and stop, confrontation all the time, that communication hopefully will lead to a better experience for all. And as I said, nothing is perfect,
right.
And when you balance that with the benefits to stabilizing the economy, because all you have to do is look around and realize the economy is rapidly changing. Office is changing, retail is changing, housing is changing. You're stabilizing a community by creating innovation that will hopefully spin off companies that will want to be here because they want to be where the hub is. That's how Silicon Valley developed. That's how Cambridge developed. I'm not saying we're building Cambridge here.
Sure.
Because that's, people take a little segment and they say, Buckley said Cambridge is coming to Burlington. What I'm saying is that when you have technology and you have that type of activity, companies that have an interest or have an idea will want to be near where that idea can become a reality.
Right, it's the sort of the idea that you kind of not just need to hire the right people, you want to have the people near you,
That's right.
the other businesses and technologies near you to sort of, that you can work where they're.
Right. And frankly, many communities would love to have what is going to be developed here, because they will view this as, over time, this will spin off technologies that will be very exciting. You know what I think is going to be the biggest problem?
What's that?
And no one would listen to me. They would have turned the volume down. I think you're going to have people up there on the Mary Cummings parkland watching these drones, which are not big drones, they're little things. I think it'll be very interesting to watch these things. I suggested at one time, half-heartedly, we should build bleachers. Because I do think it's going to be a very interesting thing to do. And it's not, there was also, I'd like to dispel the idea that it's going to be a high security, no access. There's not going to be gates or walls. It's not that type of security. So,
okay.
Yeah, so the
people can still walk around the campus.
Right. We did put up a fence, a construction fence early on, because people were walking in an area where they shouldn't be walking. There was active construction going on. We did that because we don't want people to get hurt. We weren't trying to lock them out. I mean, it was from a safety standpoint. We received calls that there were people up there while you're having people doing borings, and that's just not a good situation.
Right. There's holes in the ground.
Right. So.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming in, giving your time, giving your thoughts and perspectives, and a lot of information about this project.
And you play a critical role, so let's just turn down the volume, and we can have these discussions more often.
And that's why I have both sides come in separately and talk to me directly.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So there you have the university's take on the project. I also sat down with town meeting member and board member of the Friends of Mary Cummings Park, Jonathan Sachs, who was the most vocal opponent to the project during the proceedings, and town meeting member and land use committee chair, Monty Pearson, who was also opposed to it, about their concerns on the project and its impact on Mary Cummings Park. Here is that interview. All right, welcome back. Now I'm joined by two gentlemen who are going to talk to us about the concerns about the project and what they talked about during some of these lengthy planning board meetings that they had and other types of meetings. So I'm joined with John Sachs, who's a town meeting member and on the Master Plan Steering Committee, and also a member of the board of the Friends of Mary Cummings Parks, where he does a lot of the work with clearing the trails, leading nature walks, and running the website. And we have Monty Pearson, also a town meeting member and the chair of the Land Use Committee. Thank you both for coming on and talking with us today.
Glad to be here. Yeah.
So I thought we'd just kind of start away from the project for a second and just kind of do a little bit of the history of the park and the trust and the Friends group.
I'll make it as quick as I can because it's a long and tangled history. But
sure.
Mary Cummings, who was the widow of the Honorable John Cummings, was impressed by some of the public parks near Paris, and she thought that Boston would expand north, and without some land set aside, there would be no parks at all. So she had her lawyers draw a very strong will, and she basically requested that Boston become the trustee for this will, to keep the land open, and the wording is very clear, to be used as a public pleasure ground. This is back in the Curley administration. It's a long time ago. And they did accept it, though the will said if they didn't accept it, it would go to a different organization, the American Playground Organization. But Boston did accept it. And they sat on it for a long time. They did some unfortunate things. She had left a couple of buildings that were part of the trust that would be worth tens of millions today, but Boston took them by eminent domain to build one of the tunnels to the airport. So they were taken from her trust and nothing was paid back whatsoever. There was no Friends of Mary Cummings Park at that time. I think her assumption was that the city, by becoming trustee, would look out for the best interests of the park and the trust. But that has very rarely been the case. Boston has not understood how to deal with the park, and in more recent years made very concentrated efforts to sell the park, to break her lease. They took money from her own accounts that were supposed to pay for the care and keeping of the park and hired lawyers to break her will to sell the park to developers. It's one of the most shameful things that Boston has done. It's not the only one, but it's probably the most egregious thing that Boston has ever done in regard to that park. That was done particularly under the Menino administration. The new Walsh administration has taken a very different approach. The Friends of Mary Cummings Park was started specifically by a group of people, myself not included at that time, to stop Mayor Menino's attempt to sell the park to developers. I have been told by a number of people that without the Friends' efforts, that park would be gone today. Subsequently, it was zoned open space by the town of Burlington, which is not 100%, but it's pretty strong restriction. The legislature could overturn it if they so chose. And in fact, one of the things that frightens me about recent events is that it's proved that with enough power and money, anything can happen. So the Friends was formed and basically went to war with Boston, which was the only way to stop what Boston was doing, but it ended up being an extremely adversarial point of view. Now, when Mayor Walsh came in, they started working very closely with the trustees of reservations, who is one of the most important land protection organizations in Massachusetts. And they have been working over the last 3 years on a deal whereby the trustees of reservations would become the managers of Mary Cummings Park. They wouldn't own it, they wouldn't be the trustees, they would be hired by Boston to manage the park.
And what's the Friends' thought on that organization?
Well, our basic thought was that this was excellent news because we think the world of the trustees and the work that they do, and that basically our ship had come in because part of the deal was that the park would be given permanent protected status. There was some kind of a complicated deal going on where Boston was trying to do some other real estate, and as part of that deal, Mary Cummings Park got set aside as protected space, and the trustees would become the park managers. That deal is still being worked on as we speak. We're not particularly privy to what's going on in the background, but we assume that the trustees will be really good stewards for the park and take over a great deal of our efforts. And in fact, we are going to be redefining what is the work of the Friends in the future when the park has a major organization looking out for it. So, so we have this park which was abandoned pretty much. It was posted no trespassing for 30 years by the city. And one of the things that's very aggravating is that people will often say, well, the park isn't used, so therefore it should be developed. And our response is, well, of course it wasn't used. You posted it, no trespassing. Right, what a surprise that it wasn't used. The Friends essentially embarrassed the city into taking off the no trespassing signs, and they allowed us to put up kiosks, and with tacit or even unspecific permission, we have put up kiosks at all the entrances. We've cleared all the trails. We've put up trail signs throughout, and we have run monthly events to bring more attention to the park. And we have a whole new website where you can watch videos and learn anything you want to know. It's just marycummingspark.org.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen an uptick over the years of people using the park, enjoying it?
I would say yes. Now, there is one group, the Flyers, who fly model airplanes. They've been there for 30 years. Saturday mornings, Sunday mornings, and they've been there throughout. But I will say this is a very complicated story too, but about 8 years ago now, a deal was reached with Boston where one chunk of the park was converted into a soccer field or a playing field. Mm-hmm. They use it for soccer and they use it for girls hockey or whatever. And with that came a parking lot. And that's the first time there was a safe place to park at the main entrance area of the park. So with that parking lot, we've seen a big uptick in visitorship. There's a trail that goes around the playing field, and we put up a kiosk, and people see the kiosk, and they say, oh, and there's little maps that we put in. We keep them supplied every week, and they take a map, and they go for a walk. So that was very controversial within the Friends of Mary Cummings Park, the establishment of that playing field, because a playing field is not the same as a wild meadow.
Sure.
And also because the park was being carved up with no master plan. You say, all right, well, let's make this into a playing field, and let's make that into a golf course, and let's make that into senior housing, and pretty soon there's no park. We wanted to see a master plan with an environmental study by somebody like Mass Audubon, but that never happened. So we learned to live with that parking lot because it has brought us as many benefits as it has brought negatives.
All right. So now to the topic at hand. So we have the park.
Yep.
And sort of smack dab, sort of right in the middle of it, or right on the border of it, we have the Northeastern University campus here in Burlington. So talk about, a little bit about the project as you see it and the concerns that it raises. I know you led the charge, but I want to get Monty in a little bit.
Sure.
So we'll kind of go back and forth and have both of you respond. But
the Northeastern Campus used to be a missile base. The federal government took it by eminent domain, and oddly enough, they only were there for 9 years. That period was actually quite short, and when they were done with it, Boston didn't want it back for, I think, $200 they weren't willing to pay. And actually, apparently, neither was Burlington. So Northeastern rented it for a while and then purchased it. And that was a suburban campus for 30 years, very quiet. And then recently, the Friends were somewhat asleep at the switch, to be very honest. And we heard something about a drone cage. And to us, it was, well, they're going to, like a tent or something. I mean, what's a drone cage? And so we didn't go to the public meetings, and we didn't ask questions and complain. So back in January or early February, in 2 weekends, they put up a huge steel mesh drone cage. That drone cage is at the very highest point of the park, has a very prison-like quality, and is visible from almost every open area of the park. You can see it from the playing field on Blanchard, you can see it from Flyers Field where they fly the planes, and it completely looms over Central Field, which, as you can see from some of the images that we can show, was one of the most beautiful, unspoiled meadows with a view of maple trees. And that view is essentially permanently spoiled. That drone cage could come down in 10 years, but that's a long time to wait. So they went ahead and built that. And the planning board was, like the Friends, not quite aware of what they were saying yes to. It was unimaginable until you saw it physically, how ugly and how much of a kind of a degradation of the park that drone cage has created. Subsequently, they then went to Part B, which was to plan this new research building, Building 5. And there's been some back and forth about what the planning board was told that the building would be and what the building really is. And the truth is, nobody really knows what's going to go on in that building. Northeastern is keeping that rather secret. From our point of view, that new building, by the way, we were always shown site plans, vertical plans looking down. And you say, okay, fine. And at one of the meetings, it's on tape, I said, by the way, how tall is this building? Oh, 60 feet at the roof line, plus the HVAC, it's almost 70 feet tall, within 50 feet of the edge of the park. And that was quite shocking. And I think that was quite shocking to almost everybody in the room. But what happened at that point was that I think it became very obvious to, if you look at the tapes, almost every member of the planning board was essentially horrified by what Northeastern was doing. And I think the phrase they used is, you're building a fort facing inward and the back is facing the park. First the drone cage, now building 5. Who knows what comes next? However, the next thing that happened was that it simply became public knowledge that there is a thing in Massachusetts called the Dover Amendment, which basically says that if a nonprofit, a school or church, wants to build in a community, the local government has very, very little control over what happens. And they spent a great deal of time with Burlington's town attorney and determined that, in fact, they couldn't stop Northeastern. It didn't make any difference what the planning board said about the drone cage or building 5. They were simply going to build it anyway. So all of the histrionics that I went through to try to stop it were essentially beside the point. Northeastern had planned it in secret a long time ago. They had not revealed it until the last minute. And I was told by somebody who knows in private that they only went to the planning board out of politeness, because in fact they knew from day one that they had the Dover Amendment in their favor. They could build it no matter what Burlington said, and they were going to build it. The fact that it was desecrating the park, I think they didn't realize it. If you are a developer, and even though they're an educational institution, they are developers, they're building one of the biggest projects in Burlington, that park from their point of view was a vacant lot. And they looked at it and said, it's a vacant lot, don't worry about that, forget about it. And they went ahead and they designed it and built it. I think the people from Northeastern are good people who did a bad thing. They got caught up in a process. They had deadlines, they had money that had to be made, they had major contracts that had to be met, and they built it. And their legal team said, don't worry, we're going to ram this through. Burlington can't stop us, and that's exactly what happened. Now, I will say this, because of the yelling and screaming that we did, they're putting in a row of trees, which in 30 years will partially block these buildings.
So some concession was?
Some concessions were made, and they will claim, oh, we did everything the town asked. They did a lot of things in terms of runoff that CONSCOM asked for, Conservation Commission, because their plans were not legal without those things. So they did what they had to do. They'll tell you what they went above and beyond, but I don't really think that they did. Basically, and I think that although we shouldn't, in the planning meetings, we were not really supposed to talk about what's going in Nahant. But I think in this venue we should talk about, I think the listeners should be aware that Northeastern University is doing an almost identical process in the town of Nahant, where they're taking one of the most beloved areas, Eastern Point, where people have gone for years, and they want to put up a 60,000 square foot building in a 300-car parking garage. And
right, and they're getting a lot of pushback from a lot of residents.
They're getting a lot of pushback. And one of the points that I made very strongly is that in Nahant, almost everybody, town government and the citizens, are unified against Northeastern. They may still lose because of the Dover Amendment. Northeastern has their plans. They want to be the next MIT and Harvard, and they're going to do it regardless of what these local communities think. I think it's a publicity nightmare for them, but they don't care.
I want to jump in because I know that you, Monty, we had talked before the taping started about that you think that one of the publicity things that people might have paid more attention to if information had come out earlier was just sort of the nature of the drone cage and drones in general.
Yes, I think that, I mean, first of all, like John said, the whole process where Northeastern came in and said, we're putting the building here, and because of this Dover Amendment, it doesn't matter to us what you folks think, and it doesn't matter to us that it has this really negative impact on the park. And that's, you know, pretty extreme. But part of it, the ironic thing is that the reason Northeastern has that ability to do that is because they're an educational institution. And this Dover Amendment was passed to make sure that educational institutions in Massachusetts have the opportunity to expand and meet people's needs. But the campus on Burlington isn't really an educational institution. It's a military research area. And it's going to have very few students at it. When it was asked at the land use and planning board meetings, they said that there would be some advanced graduate students who might participate. So it's not really a student area at all. It's going to be a series of buildings that are set up to do military research. And they're not willing to really say that right out loud. But two things have happened with Northeastern. One is that a few years ago, they were named a National Center for Academic Excellence in Cyber Operations by the National Security Agency. And the last time the National Security Agency was in the public eye, it was taping our phone calls and sucking up our email information and tracking people on Facebook and things like that. So it's the national spying organization. The second thing is that the site where in Burlington is a regional hub for the U.S. Army Research Laboratory. Mm-hmm. And the press release for that, which was put out this spring, says that there's going to be research on homeland security and defense technology. Now, I don't know all the kinds of research technology that's going on, but obviously with the drone cage, there's going to be drone research going on in those buildings. And there was immediate thought that, well, maybe we were going to connect with Amazon and have people, so that people would know more about delivering your books from Amazon. But we now know that because this is going to be a military facility, a military research facility, and there's a drone cage, they're going to be doing research on drone warfare, basically. And the drones that are inside that cage are going to be drones that are being tested for improving drone warfare. And so you can see why Northeastern wasn't really open about who was going to be in the building. They were going to build a 100,000 square foot building, and they said they didn't have any potential clients. They were just going to build a building and people were going to come. Usually you don't build a 100,000 square foot building without having some idea what you're going to fill it with. And they're obviously going to fill it with defense contractors and defense research people. And for me, it creates a kind of a moral dilemma, because when I walk through the park and I'm going to look over there and there's going to be military drones flying around, and I'm going to say, wow, look at these beautiful flowers, and there's drones that are going to be used to blow people up in other parts of the world where we feel that their particular political group is not favorable enough to the United States, and so we ought to be interfering in what goes on in that particular country. And that just makes me uncomfortable. It's one thing.
Yeah, to be fair, I don't know if we know exactly what kind of drones are going to be testing. I mean, the military application, but there's a wide range of things besides just, the big ones that drop bombs. But I get your larger point that it's still, have a military application.
Yeah, I mean, if the site wasn't a U.S. Army research lab, then you could say, well, there could be a lot of different things going on there. But because it's a military research lab, you can guess that the drone thing is going to be for military drones. And so I feel a little uncomfortable with that in the middle of a park in Burlington. It's not, I think, very much of an asset to the community. And clearly not an asset in the sense that because it's a educational institution, they also don't pay any property taxes. So, that whole addition of this to Burlington is troubling to me.
So it sounds like you're kind of suggesting that maybe a closer look at the Dover Act is in order.
I think that would certainly make sense, though
Yeah.
I imagine that it would be probably a difficult thing to overturn or change the Dover Amendment, because the nonprofits, basically the universities that benefit from it, are fairly powerful in the area.
Right. Well, that's very true.
Certainly in Boston, Cambridge, the power of MIT and Harvard is quite substantial.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, though. I think that it's one thing for universities to be serving their students and serving their communities or serving the country by expanding and providing better services. It's another thing for these institutions to use defense contracts to expand their research areas so that we have a bigger military-industrial complex. And I just think that that's not a neutral activity. It's a contested activity in the United States because I think that a lot of people are uncomfortable with the size of the military budget and the extent of American military operations all around the world. And so I don't think that they should be getting not only a tax break for those institutions, but also the right to put them wherever they want to without local communities having any zoning access to them.
It's a good question whether that's one of the issues that we really have no idea and probably never will have any idea what's going on in that park. It seems to me that if you were going to put a drone testing facility that had military implications, that Hanscom Field would have been a great place to put it because it's already an Air Force base and nobody lives right around it, plus which it has jet noise all day anyway, so a few little drones wouldn't make a difference. Putting it in the middle of one of the two open spaces left in the town of Burlington, I think is a small tragedy. I'm not going to say that it's destroying the entire park, but it's certainly downgrading substantially the value of that piece of open space that we have worked so tirelessly to preserve and enhance and bring people to. I'd like to bring up another point, and that is this. The trustees of reservations have been working for the last year or so to raise the funds that they feel that they need to do the right job of turning that into one of their primary parks. It will be the closest trustees' property to the city of Boston. And with the varied landscape from the wetlands to the open meadows, which are very rare, to the deep forest, it has potential to be one of their most successful parks. Now, the problem is that it will take them perhaps another 6 months or a year to raise the money that they want and to build the facilities that they want and to start the programs they want and to include Mary Cummings Park in their ongoing set of programs and maps to make it what I think could have been, might someday be, one of the most popular parks in their whole chain, second to Crane's Beach, which of course has a beach and therefore is in another category. But nevertheless, this is close to Boston and you could theoretically get there by public transportation. However, that entire park is now somewhat dominated by a drone cage and soon to be a research building. And if you go to one of the two meadows, Central Field, which we have very beautiful pictures. This is a beautiful picture that I took of some parents brought their two little kids out for a walk a few years ago, and I said, "Can I take your picture?"
Show this as you're talking about it.
That view, with the beautiful maples in the background, that view is destroyed. That view is gone. That's never going to be there again because of the drone cage. There are places where the trail goes very close to the drone cage. There's a picture of that in winter, and it just looms over the trail. In 30 years, trees may block the building and the drone cage, but probably only in summer because they will only be, they won't be purely evergreens. There will be a mix of evergreens and deciduous trees. So before the trustees is able to get in there and bring this park the level of attention that would have prevented Northeastern from, I won't use the word destroying, but certainly degrading the park. And by the way, I think if you look at the tapes of those planning board hearings, I don't think there's any question that everybody in the room, all the planning board members, and if you really come right down to it, I think Northeastern, some of those people, the architect and the other people, they felt very badly about the fact that they were degrading this park. but they were caught in a system that they couldn't get out. There was too much money at stake. There was federal military money, and they could not say no. And they knew they had the Dover Amendment, so it was cooked from day one. Now, I want to mention one other thing. I believe that having spent a day with an environmental engineer, that we probably have enough information to file an appeal with DEP and actually stop this process for months and cost them millions of dollars.
You know, that was going to be my last question, actually, was any possible action in the future. So, but you say stop it for months, not stop it.
That's probably why we're not going to do that. If I thought that we could stop or force Building 5 to be moved to a more reasonable spot, or somehow make the drone cage disappear, or somehow be put in a less obvious spot, if I thought there was a way, I would do it. But the truth is, if we filed this appeal with state DEP, it would really cause terrible trouble for Northeastern. They would be hung up for months in appeals with the state. And I'm not going to do that, because in the end, it will be the same result, and it would be purely an act of retribution. It wouldn't change anything. And also, remember that I am a single individual not being paid. The price that I am paying for trying to single-handedly fight Northeastern is quite severe financially. I mentioned in a public meeting that I'm driving for Lyft now because my freelance business has gone to hell in a handbasket, because everybody from Northeastern is getting paid a good, solid salary to force this through. And then there's me, unpaid, trying to stop it, working nights and weekends. I can't afford to do that. And the other problem is, it would be purely to cause trouble, because in the end, they would win that. They would solve the problems that they're creating, and in another 6 months later, they would get their building, and the destruction would go ahead anyway. I would be poorer, and they would be poorer. So I'm not going to do it, but I could do it.
Right.
I think, though, that one of the things to follow up is this Dover Amendment. I don't know very much about it, but I think that it really is something that needs to be looked at now that we're finding that nonprofit organizations, hospitals, and educational institutions are kind of wandering out of their mission and entering off into kind of entrepreneurial kind of activities where, you know, they're going to make some money off this defense contract, and they're going to sell technology to this company and stuff like that. And you've got to say to yourself, what does this have to do with being an educational institution? And it strikes me that this is kind of a flaw. I mean, it was a well-meaning amendment, but I think that it needs to be tightened up. And I don't know exactly how to go about doing that, but I think that that really is our next step, because I don't think we want to be in a situation where educational institutions can do anything they want to when it comes to land use. I mean, one thing to keep in mind, for example, is that campus isn't finished yet. There's room for 2 or 3 other buildings, and we're basically being told that we don't have any kind of oversight over how those buildings go in or what their impact is going to be. And one of the things that hasn't been brought up yet is that as this campus gets built out and more people work there, they're going to have these traffic impacts on a couple of the most congested intersections in Burlington. And I think that they need to be responsible to the community. I mean, I think that we shouldn't have a situation where large organizations, be they nonprofit or for-profit organizations, where they have their internal plans, have precedence over the needs and interests of the community in which they're located. And that's clearly the case for this Northeastern situation. And we're going to have more of that unless we change that, the Dover law.
Well, one of the things I think that's unfortunate about this outcome is that almost all of the members of the planning board basically said in not so many words, that they were holding their noses and voting for this because they felt they had no choice.
Yes.
If you go back and read what they said, they all had very serious misgivings, but legally they didn't feel they could stop it. Everybody in the room, I think including the Northeastern people, knew that what happened in that campus is a travesty and deplorable, but not illegal. So basically, on the higher levels of Northeastern, where the deals are being made with federal defense money, what they've learned is that being aggressive, do not go to the community, do not sit down with the trustees or the Friends of Mary Cummings Park or anybody in the community. Force your way through. That works. So why would you do it any other way? That's what they're trying to do in Nahant. And I would urge anybody that has friends in Nahant or has ever been there to go to, it's very easy to Google the website for Keep Nahant Wild and find out what's going on there. One of the things that could happen is if they can be stopped through some mechanism, and I don't know what mechanism that would be in Nahant, maybe that would cause Northeastern to stop and say, we're losing too much of our brand. We're hurting our reputation too much by being so forceful. But I do think that in a country where, as Monty has referred to, the defense spending in the United States is more than what, the next 19 countries combined.
Something like that.
I mean, that has a very negative effect on society. So much of our tax money is being blown up and spent on things that create war. Now, and I personally don't believe it brings us safety, but what it does do, this Northeastern is an example of where that big defense money has caused harm to a local community. It has partially destroyed one of our parks because there's money in it. There's big federal defense money in it. And that's where one of the aspects of our big out-of-control defense spending has harmed this town of Burlington. They have partially ruined one of our 2 open spaces.
All right, I think I'm gonna have to give you the last word there since we're past time, but and as the viewers can, they'll see the pro side and then your side, so I think that we have a lot of information out there for people to make up their mind. I want to thank you guys both, Monty Pearson, John Sachs, for coming on the show today and expressing your thoughts, concerns, and feelings about the project, so I appreciate it.
Thanks.
So there you have it, 2 sides of a debate over a significant project. I'd like to thank my guests, attorney Bob Buckley of Reamer and Bronstein, and town meeting members Jonathan Sachs and Monty Pearson. I also thank you for watching. I'm BNEWS Director Rich Hosford, and we'll see you next time for another edition of BNews In Depth.